Mr. Daouda Diallo, Minister of Finance and Economy of Senegal. He is on the podium with us here now. And I also wish to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of African Union, and Her Excellency Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNITAD. I have also the honor to welcome Dr. Hanan Morsi, Chief Economist and Deputy Executive Secretary of United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. We started a bit late for reasons beyond our control, so I'm not going to take much time introducing this session. I just want to say the issue of illicit financial flows is well known, and the context is the theme of this year's session of economic of conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, mobilizing, financing Africa's recovery, and mobilization of domestic resources is critical. And in this context, illicit financial flows are an important aspect of financing. So in this session today, we would like to look at a few things. One, to showcase country experiences in combating illicit financial flows, and two, to discuss an inclusive architecture to address illicit financial flows and asset recoveries in the context, of course, of the work we have been doing in the UN in general and in the African Union Commission, and through the high-level panel on illicit financial flows led by former President of South Africa, Mr. Thabo Mbeki. So without further ado, I would like to say good morning to Ms. Rebecca Greenspan and invite her to deliver her statement. Good morning. Ms. Rebecca, Ms. Greenspan. Just to remind you, I think you have channels 5, 6, and 8 for interpretation into Arabic, French, and Portuguese. Sorry, Arabic, English, French, and Arabic. Do we have the online contact?
Mr. Moderator, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Rebecca Greenspan says she's having technical problems. She sent a chat. If you can hear me.
Okay, IT technicians, Rebecca is there. Please unmute her. I think she's muted. What is this?
Hello?
Yeah. Good morning, Ms. Greenspan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank
And
you.
you're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to be here today with you. I want to send a warm welcome to all the distinguished panelists that are with us today and also to the audience. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege for me to address you today in our collaborative effort to shape the path for financing Africa's recovery. First of all, Chair, let me allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the government of Senegal for hosting this important conference and to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for its strong partnership with UNCTAD. I see Hanan is there with you, is with us. Thank you, Hanan, and please convey my gratitude also to Vera Songwe, that is such a wonderful leader and has exerted such a leadership in the global crisis response group that the Secretary General of the UN has put together to really respond to this crisis. You know that the world economy has not been under this amount of stress as we are seeing today for a very long time. And this is a result of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the terrible war in Ukraine that affects food, energy, and finance, as well as the mounting cost of climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic has a devastating impact on many economies of the developing world, including the African economies, where still these challenges are being exacerbated now with the war in Ukraine. Economies across Africa are feeling the brunt of this non-stop, back-to-back crisis. Shock after shock, debt burdens rising, poor people suffering, fiscal space shrinking, and the sustainable development goals fall increasingly out of reach. These shocks increase also structural fragilities and widen gaps that were already too wide. When the 2030 agenda was approved, we at UNCTAD calculated the investment gap for developing countries to meet their sustainable development goals at $2.45 trillion. The pandemic widened the gap to $4.3 trillion. And the war in Ukraine is expected to widen the gap further. You know, dear chair, dear panelists, that when you have an ever widening gap, this stops to be a gap and starts to be an abyss. It is important so to assess the financing gap and work systematically to close them. UNCTAD is engaged with countries like Egypt, Burkina Faso, Zambia, to support national SDG investment gap analysis. And in 2020, we estimated that illicit financial flows, if curbed, could close almost half of the SDG financing gap in Africa. Half of the SDG financing gap in Africa. Troublingly, as I said before, this financing gap risk is increasing with tightening global financial conditions. We are very worried about the increase in the interest rates that make it even harder for the developing countries to finance itself, and the cost of the debt is growing and growing. And we know that they are also shrinking aid budgets. In 2021, advanced economies provided only 0.33% of their gross national income as official development assistance. And this is less than half the 0.7 commitment that they have made. And also we know that the promise made in the Paris Agreement for the climate change fund has not been met yet. So we have insisted that it is critical to establish structured solutions to developing countries' debt problems and effective mechanisms for global tax governance. These challenges are mounting and cannot wait for their solutions. So as developing countries search for the funds needed to recover from the series of crises, attempting to build resilience for future challenges, we have to understand that the international financial system has to give a response that will be commensurate to the level of the crisis that we are going through. It's important to say this upfront, but at the same time, we cannot allow that billions of dollars of illicit financial flows slip through the cracks every year. So domestic resource mobilization, asset recovery, and curbing illicit financial flows are more critical today than ever before. Governments' capacity to raise resources through return of assets will be fundamental. So the illicit financial flows drain domestic resources that would be painfully needed to achieve sustainable development and meet people's needs. And at the same time, the leakages of funds weakens trust and undermine the social contract. So the impact of the illicit financial flows lead to particularly dire effects for the most vulnerable, and especially women and girls. UNCTAD's research show that in Africa, countries with high international financial flows afford only about half of the financing for health and education compared to countries with low illicit financial flows. So our first problem to deal with this issue is data. Without data, curbing this problem is like fumbling in the dark. We need estimates to shed light on the activities, sectors, and channels most prone to illicit finance, pointing to where actions should be undertaken as a priority to curb these flows. But it is a challenge that is very important, is difficult. We know that it's difficult, but it's too destructive and too important to ignore. So tracking illicit finance is a precondition for the efficiency of efforts to stop the drain of resources. In 2017, UNCTAD accepted the challenge to lead global work to measure illicit financial flows, jointly with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. And you know, the UN General Assembly designated UNCTAD and the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes as co-custodians of SDG indicator 16.4.1 of illicit financial flows to help member states monitor progress towards these targets and towards asset recovery. So we were mandated to develop statistical methodologies and build countries' own capacity to monitor trade and tax-related illicit financial flows. This includes flows from trade misinvoicing, tax evasion by individuals, and aggressive tax avoidance by multinational enterprises. And UNODC, together with UNCTAD, also have helped to focus on the illicit financial flows that come from crime and criminal markets. When we embarked on this work, there was no agreement on what was the illicit financial flows. There were many strong contradictory opinions. But after 3 years of intensive expert consultations, we achieved globally agreed concepts for measuring illicit financial flows. This is a first. This is very important. And now these concepts and measuring indicators have been adopted by the UN Statistical Commission. And at the political level, they have been adopted by FACTI panel and the Cluster 5 of the UN Regional Commissions on Financing for Development in the era of COVID-19. So we have made some steps ahead, and we are strongly committed to support government's capacity to act on illicit financial flows and equip interested African countries with tools and methods to accumulate the evidence base for tracking and recovering illicit finance. Since 2021, 18 countries across regions have been piloting and testing the methods and tools developed by UNCTAD and UNODC, including 12 countries in Africa. And Senegal has already successfully implemented this pilot. We will hear this experience later today. So the pilots have shown that much hinges on concerted action. We need collaboration across borders, and we need the ability to establish a whole one government approach, because illicit financial flows cannot be curbed in silos with only national borders, and it cannot be on silos. We need central banks, customs, tax authorities, financial intelligence, statistical offices and ministries to pull together their data, their expertise, and their political powers to really deal with this issue. And we also learned that digitalization can help a lot. For example, digitalizing customs is a very important tool also to curb illicit financial flows. And here, the program of Asikuda that we do at the customs, with the customs authorities, have really shown very good results. So let me just finish saying that we have renewed our mandate on illicit financial flows, stemming from the ministerial meeting in UNCTAD 15 conference, and we will further strengthen our cooperation and support to member states. And we look forward to empowering national authorities in African countries to track illicit financial flows using now international agreed and comparable methods, to benefit from peer learning and globally developed tools and resources for analyzing illicit finance, and to devise effective policies to tackle the illicit financial flows. Let me extend my sincere appreciation to pioneering and pilot countries: Angola, Benin, Burkina Faso, Egypt, Gabon, Ghana, Mozambique, Namibia, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Zambia. Thank you very much. Thank you for your persistence and dedication to discuss. And we hear your call for continued support, and we stand ready to engage with other African governments in this important agenda. So thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of you for the collaboration, the cooperation, and especially with the Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Ms. Gillian Dell. I am not going to summarize what Madam Greenspan has said, but being part of this process of identification, definition, measurement, and actions to curb illicit financial flows over more than 10 years. I'm very glad to hear that UNCTAD, together with other UN agencies, have been able to follow through with the recommendations of Addis Ababa Action on Financing for Development, to follow through with the measurement and capacity building and building collaborations to curb illicit financial flows. So without further ado, I would like to move to Mr. Bankole Adeoye, Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of African Union. And then I will come back to this podium. So, Dr. Bankole, you have 10 minutes, please. You are most welcome, and we apologize for the delay. Thank you.
Rachel, let me join in welcoming this side event, the Deputy Executive Secretary of ECA, the Secretary General of UNCTAD, heads of national anti-corruption agencies in Africa, and ladies and gentlemen. I believe the UNCTAD representative has made a very, very insightful opening for all of us. So I'll be very brief. The first is that regional efforts to track, to recover, and to return assets must be holistic, must continue to be our guiding emphasis. As you are aware, this debate really started with a conference of ministers a few years ago on the African continent, resulting in the establishment of the AU UNECA high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, chaired very, very effectively by former President Thabo Mbeki of the Republic of South Africa. So we know that our continent faces a lot of challenges. On our part in the Political Affairs, Peace and Security Department, working very well with the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption, we continue to see illicit financial flows as one key challenge that we must address now and here. I therefore really convinced that despite the scourge of terrorism, violent extremism, the resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government, the impact of the war in Ukraine on the economic and political landscape of our continent, COVID-19 as well, we must not forget that this remains a clear and present danger. It is for this reason that the lack of accountability and sometimes full control has been made of our resources that have been looted and cleverly hidden away, particularly in safe havens. We must continue to find the necessary political will and the measures to stop the drain of Africa's foreign exchange reserves. As you know, in the UNCTAD report, almost 3.7% of the annual GDP of Africa is lost to IFS. It is therefore important that we recall the sterling work that was done by many, including ECA, the current chair of Nigeria's Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICPC, and others to get approval of the 33rd Assembly of the African Heads of State of what we call the Common African Position on Asset Recovery. This should remain a guide, and it fits squarely into the agenda that we have before us today. We consider CAPA, as we call it, as a positive formula to stemming or reversing illicit financial flows from Africa. It sets out many recommended measures and actions required to effectively address the continuous loss of African assets. It is for this reason that we need to do more and advocate more, take more action regarding the detection and identification of assets, which forms the first pillar in the Common African Position, the recovery and the return of assets. The third pillar speaks to management of recovered assets, and of course, the cooperation and the partnership we're speaking today when it comes to asset recovery. It is for this that we must continue to engage at the highest level, internationally and regionally, continentally, to promote greater awareness of CAPA, the Common African Position. And we welcome the outcome of the side event that was held at the 9th Conference of State Parties of UNCAC in December 2021. Excellencies, let me make clear that we all know for sure that unless we end RFFs, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Africa will not be able to achieve the 7 aspirations under Agenda 2063, including a peaceful and secure Africa. We must therefore mobilize and remobilize all stakeholders to stop safe havens, to booster international efforts, to secure the return of stolen assets to their legitimate countries of origin, and to partner with like minds like ECA, like UNCTAD, to make the difference happen. In 2018, Nigeria led the nexus between corruption and conflict, implications for peace and security in Africa. This will be one of the areas where we'll be taking forward with your support. Another initiative that we'll be looking at will be governance and the right to development. This will make the Common African Position come alive. Let me end by confirming the readiness of the African Union Commission to better serve Africa when it comes to these valuable resources. The transboundary nature of illicit financial flows makes it imperative for us to promote the Common African Position. Finally, I really want to assure you that the Common African Position remains an expression, a profound expression of African solidarity, but also of international understanding and support. Let us continue this fight against illicit financial flows. Let us mobilize all stakeholders, and let us continue to implement the Common African Position. I thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Bankole Adeoye. Thanks for reminding us of the commitment of African Union and African head of states to the fight against illicit financial flows. Indeed, the endorsement of the Mbeki panel's report by African head of states back in 2015 contributed to the action against illicit financial flows. And of course, the Common African Position on asset recovery is a huge leap forward in supporting African countries' effort to fight illicit financial flows. I think UN, African Union, and other institutions working together can make a huge difference at this time of high need for resource mobilization. Let me move now to the podium here to His Excellency Madio Dibo, representative of the Honorable Abdullahi Daouda Diallo, Minister of Finance and Economy of Senegal. So, Mr. Dibo, you have 7 minutes as we agreed. Thank you.
Je voudrais commencer par remercier la CIA pour le choix du thème qui est d'une importance. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais remercier la CIA pour le choix du thème qui est d'une importance capitale et pour sa pertinence aussi. Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Je voudrais tout d'abord dire que l'Afrique fait face à un défi majeur qui est de trouver une trajectoire de croissance satisfaisante afin de réduire considérablement la pauvreté et de trouver le sentier du développement. À ce titre, elle devrait surmonter un nombre d'obstacles, dont les flux illicites. Ces derniers trouvent un terrain favorable dans la corruption, le trafic de drogue, le détournement de deniers publics, le piratage et la contrefaçon, le trafic de produits pharmaceutiques, la traite d'êtres humains, la cybercriminalité et l'évasion fiscale, notamment à travers les transferts indirects de bénéfices. Les flux financiers illicites alimentent également un cercle vicieux de corruption. Leur recrudescence a des conséquences sur l'augmentation de l'instabilité, de la violence ou même du terrorisme. La complexité d'un tel phénomène requiert une approche globale dans sa résolution, eu égard aux parties prenantes constituées des pays d'origine, de transit et de destination des activités y afférentes. Les activités illicites constituent une menace pour les pays et mettent en péril la stabilité du système financier international ainsi que l'équilibre de nos fragiles économies. Il expose les citoyens à la violence. Au-delà des questions de sécurité, ces activités créent un préjudice important aux finances publiques des pays africains et affectent la mobilisation des ressources intérieures nécessaires au financement de leur développement. Son Excellence, le président de la République du Sénégal, rappelait à l'occasion de la 3e conférence internationale sur le financement du développement à Addis Abeba que les montants perdus par l'Afrique dans les flux financiers illicites depuis 2000 auraient permis d'éponger la totalité de la dette extérieure en laissant un solde pour soutenir les efforts de lutte contre la pauvreté, notamment pour le financement d'infrastructures agricoles, hydrauliques, routières, scolaires et sanitaires, dont la réalisation participe à la transformation structurelle des économies africaines. C'est pourquoi il a inscrit parmi les objectifs de sa gouvernance publique la promotion de la transparence dans la gestion des affaires publiques, la lutte contre la corruption et la perte de recettes publiques dues à des activités criminelles, la lutte contre l'impunité et la promotion des obligations réditionnelles avec la participation de la société civile et du secteur privé. Le renforcement de la justice et de l'état de droit, c'est dans cette perspective qu'il a créé l'Office national de lutte contre la fraude et la corruption, OFNAC, en 2012. Il faut rappeler que le renforcement de la sécurité, de la stabilité, de la gouvernance, de la protection des droits et libertés et la consolidation de l'état de droit constitue le 3e axe du plan Sénégal émergent. Depuis 2004, le Sénégal a la loi uniforme numéro 2004-09 relative à la lutte contre le blanchiment de capitaux, réponse du Sénégal à la mobilisation internationale réaffirmée par la volonté clairement traduite au plan sous-régional par l'UEMOA et la CEDEAO à travers le GIABA de lutte contre la criminalité financière. Cette création est renouvelée à travers la loi 2018-03 relative à la lutte contre le blanchiment des capitaux et le financement du terrorisme et traduit la volonté réaffirmée des autorités sénégalaises de se doter d'un dispositif juridique et organisationnel de lutte contre le blanchiment de capitaux et le financement du terrorisme conforme aux standards internationaux. Cette loi a 3 objectifs. Prévenir le blanchiment de capitaux, détecter en vue de sa répression le blanchiment de capitaux, permettre la coopération internationale autour de la lutte contre le blanchiment de capitaux. Au titre de l'année 2020, la CENTIF a adressé 328 requêtes aux auteurs nationaux, à savoir les notaires, les banques, la BCAO, les administrations publiques, le secteur financier décentralisé, les sociétés d'assurance. Et l'exploitation des informations obtenues des acteurs nationaux et étrangers en sus des résultats des enquêtes menées a permis à la CENTIF d'aboutir à l'élaboration de 53 rapports d'enquête dont l'examen a donné, outre le classement de 70 demandes d'opérations suspectées en raison de l'absence d'éléments de confirmation des soupçons, les conclusions ci-dessus. Des enquêtes complémentaires pour 12 dossiers composés de 14 demandes de déclaration d'opérations suspectes, la transmission au procureur de la République territorialement compétent et de 11 rapports portant sur 15 déclarations d'opérations suspectes pour lesquelles des indices de blanchiment de capitaux ou de financement du terrorisme ont été décelés. Dans le souci de trouver des solutions aux flux financiers illicites et améliorer son dispositif de recouvrement relatif, le Sénégal a mis en place une entité dénommée Office national de recouvrement des avoirs criminels, ONRAC, en juillet 2021, qui a modifié la loi de 1965 portant code de procédure pénale. Par ailleurs, le Sénégal abrite le siège du groupe intergouvernemental d'action contre le blanchiment d'argent en Afrique de l'Ouest, GIABA. C'est là une affirmation résolue de son engagement dans le combat contre les flux financiers illicites de manière concertée avec les autres États membres de la CEDEAO. Il convient de souligner l'importance de la mission du GIABA et des cellules de renseignement financier dans ce combat, ainsi que dans la mise en œuvre de la politique globale de nos États en la matière. Le Sénégal travaille à sortir de la surveillance renforcée par le groupe d'action financière internationale GAFI. À ce titre, un certain nombre de défiances identifiées par le GAFI ont déjà été corrigées, notamment sur le plan de la conformité technique. En effet, le Sénégal a adopté 13 actes législatifs et réglementaires majeurs, dont les plus notables portent respectivement sur un régime juridique plus large pour la collecte, la mise à jour, le stockage des informations sur les bénéficiaires effectifs par la modification du Code général des impôts en 2013. L'incrimination complète du financement du terrorisme et la création de l'ONRAC par la modification des codes pénals et de procédure pénale. L'organisation et le fonctionnement de l'ONRAC, le directeur général de l'ONRAC a été nommé en début décembre 2021. La désignation du président de la commission consultative de gel administratif en octobre 2021. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Debo, and thanks for the reflection on what Senegal has been doing to fight financial crimes and illicit financial flows individually and jointly with other ECOWAS countries. Now, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Hanan Mursi, Chief Economist and Deputy Executive Secretary of ECA. She was slotted to make the first welcome remarks and statement, but because of the delay, we started with speakers who joined us virtually. To you, Dr. Hanan.
Good morning, everyone. Let me, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, everyone. So I wanted today to perhaps put context of the discussion for illicit financial flows for Africa. I think our dear colleague, the UNICDAD Secretary General, Rebecca Greenspan, already provided a kind of a global overview of the issues. And I wanted to perhaps give this further context for the African situation. So let me perhaps start with the situation from the financing side for Africa. Africa has huge financing needs. We estimate that infrastructure needs are between 130 to 170 billion US dollars a year. For education, there is a financing gap of 39 billion US dollars a year. Also for health, there is a financing gap of 66 billion US dollars a year. And then on top of that, for climate change, there is a need between 3 and 5% of GDP a year. So the financing needs of Africa are huge. And this has been even further compounded with the pandemic. So the SDG financing is estimated at 200 billion, and then it has increased due to COVID by 154 billion. So basically, that leads us to think that every resource matters. Leakages mean really squeezing the fiscal space that is available for countries to do other things with. And hence the importance of really closing these loopholes. So ECA, for example, had actually estimated that Africa lost 84 billion US dollars a year in illicit financial flows just from trade misinvoicing alone between 2000 and 2016. If we were to put that in context, just of the, relative to the figures I've mentioned, that translates to 1.25 of the estimated health financing gap. It's twice the annual needs for closing the education financing gap. It's more than twice the official development flows that the continent receives. And it's really almost equal to what Africa receives in remittances a year. So we're talking about huge amounts. And curbing these illicit financial flows will require enhancing transparency, improving data, and also data exchanges across countries, as well as strong collaboration and consistent engagement between Africa and global players, such as the G7, the G20, to really have an African voice. This issue is an issue, the illicit financial flows is an issue that ECA has really been working on and leading for a while since the publication of the report in 2015 of the African Union and ECA high-level panel. And a lot of work has been done since then, including the economic governance report that looked at the issue and the capacity constraint, and basically found out that more than 60% of countries lack basic institutions and legal frameworks that are required to tackle the issues. So really addressing these like domestic capacity constraints would be key for Africa to be able to benefit from all these international agreements that are unfolding. Also, our colleagues earlier and from UNICDA talked also about number of collaborations that we are doing with them and other UN agencies. I'm not going to dwell further on, but there is a very strong collaboration with number of UN entities, and we already are piloting, measurement methodologies in 12 countries, and we're also working on issues with a cluster of 5 Secretary Generals financing for development to basically look further into this issue and how we can build consensus toward a global framework for recovery of assets. So a lot of work is actually ongoing, but perhaps let me focus on 3 areas. One is the area of tax havens. And here, this is really a very important issue to pay attention to, and to have an overhaul reform of it in international context. And we commend the OECD recent proposals for an international minimum corporate tax. But these new tax norms will need to be designed in an inclusive setting where the way that they are designed can also benefit African countries. And here, that's why also it's important to have, as we've been hearing through the last 3 days, to really have African voice at the table when these type of initiatives are being discussed, so that the reforms can trickle down to all rather than trickle down to some. The other important area is really the joint efforts against illicit financial flows. In light of recent global challenges. And it's very important to have global, to harness global leadership to really tackle these issues and to stop these illicit financial flows from draining much needed resources, especially in the context of Africa, to take action and to have a smoother recovery from the shocks that the continent has faced. Finally, I'd like to really reiterate the commitment of ECA for this work and for continuing action on it. And we've already have even part of the last 3 days and the discussion during the experts meeting, we have been working on even resolutions related to this that I invite all participants to have a look at, and that we intend this is a part of ECA commitment, and really like listening to the demands for member states to help in these areas. We can assure you that we will continue to work further with member states to enhance their capacities and to support them to get much needed resources and avoid these leaks from illicit financial flows. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to Dr. Hanan
Dr. Hanan talked about ECA commitments, of course, the broader context of IFFs and ECA commitment to support member states in many ways, including capacity building, including, of course, advocacy and technical support on the ground. In my view, fighting illicit financial flows is first and foremost the responsibility of governments, and action by government is critical. So I would like to give now time to participants from member states to make comments, ask questions, and also to tell us very briefly how member states are fighting illicit financial flows on the ground. So let me start with representatives from member states who will kick off the discussion. We have sorry, we have two speakers who are connecting virtually. Mr. Bolaji, anti-corruption, joining from Nigeria. Mr. Bolaji, I'm sorry, you are most welcome. We are running behind the schedule. We are most welcome and thank you for your patience. And then after Mr. Bolaji, we will have Gillian, who will be also speaking for 5 minutes each. Welcome, Mr. Bolaji. And then in the podium here, we have Mr. Diop, and then I will give the floor to other participants. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Bolaji.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I hope you can hear me very well.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Thank you very much. I commend the ECA and those who have spoken at this panel, starting with the distinguished Secretary General of UNCTAD and all the other participants and panelists. I would not repeat some of those things that have been said by previous speakers on the implications of not dealing with illicit financial flows by African governments. I think that is good, just in case anybody is wondering, why is this an issue? I think we must first understand that the pillars of today's international financial architecture is over 100 years old, even though it's an organic pillar and an architecture that comprises legal agreements, institutions, formal and informal economic actors, professional groups, and all that. What is important is that when this pillar was being constructed, Africa did not have a voice on the table. Africa was under colonialism. And so by the time Africa came out of colonialism, with all of its implications and the booby traps for neo-colonialism, a part of which, of course, we must admit is the absence of commitment by some African leaders, you can then understand why Africa is in such a very difficult and negative position, economically and financially. Second point that we need to bear in mind, if we evaluate the concerns of those who designed the architecture, who are the rich countries of the North, and those who have suffered the absence of inclusivity, who are the borrowing countries, those who are struggling for foreign direct investment all the time, their concerns and needs are different. So those who export capital, what they are interested in is different from those who import capital. And so the rules over the years have always been skewed in favor of those who export capital. Third point, when you consider the fact that the headquarters of multinational corporations globally, most of them are domiciled in the global North. And those countries are determined that whatever business those companies do globally, they derive the most in terms of revenue. So there is a fierce rules that are equitable to everybody. Now, I was a member of the FACTI panel, and some of the very main concerns of the FACTI panel, which was set up by the UN General Assembly, and was to work for 1 year and to submit his report, which he did in February 2021. It focused on some of these issues that we're talking about. And so the challenge that we find ourselves with is that global issues like corruption have a global framework to deal with it in the UN Convention Against Corruption. Unfortunately, illicit financial flows is also a global issue, but there is no global framework to deal with it. And so we have a situation in which there are silos of initiatives to tackle this problem, but they are hardly ever inclusive enough, they are never broad enough, and they don't take account of everybody that needs to be taken account of. This is the fundamental difference that we need to address. Never mind that there are some initiatives like the OECD BEPS framework, which is ongoing, until African countries have a full voice, are able to put their concerns on the table, and they are seriously considered and taken on board. We will continue to struggle to get the finance that we need to meet goals. And as everybody has said virtually on this panel, both COVID-19 and the war, Russian-Ukraine war, is going to compound the situation. So we don't know where things are going to stand by the time the war is over. And don't forget that COVID-19 is still very much around. Now, so what should African countries do? Basically, I will quickly run through that. African countries need to put their resources where their mouth is. This is very important. And this should start by building capacity both at national and regional or continental levels to understand what is IFF and how to deal with it. This is very important. Otherwise, countries will be chasing shadows. Secondly, African countries need to, in a unified way, and I'm happy at the moves being taken by the ECA, to establish coherence around actions that have been agreed between African countries who have a common position on this issue, deriving especially from the Mbeki report and all that, and those who do not have. Thirdly, we must obviously integrate into global mechanisms. We must work with the world. I will not speak about the CAPA because Ambassador Adeoye has dealt with it. But like the moderator said, the first sign of seriousness must start from governments. African governments must show that they have a determination to deal with illicit financial flows. And it starts by improving the capacity to look at trade documentation and how to prevent the falsification of records. With trade mispricing, evaluate the operation of multinational corporations, review contracts that facilitate IFFs, because at the end of the day, those who practice IFF and are able to get away with it through commercial transactions, they rely on contractual agreements. They have an agreement to flash in your face. And even though those agreements are flawed because they were not properly negotiated. And when there's a dispute, the matter ends up in arbitration, and oftentimes African countries lose. So you need to change that part of the architecture completely. Secondly, African countries must understand that multinationals they facilitate IFF by splitting contracts and making the juicy part of the contract pretending that that juicy part is being carried out in their jurisdiction, while the non-juicy parts are being carried out in Africa. A foreign company that has a subsidiary in any African country will pretend that that subsidiary is unable to deal with the most lucrative part of the contract, and that is the channel for beginning of the channel for implementing illicit financial flows. Then, of course, the use of shell companies that are incorporated in tax havens. Why can't we have, for example, once a company is incorporated in a tax haven, that should be a red flag. That should be a red flag. If your multinational company is not domiciled, your headquarters is in Europe, why are you then bringing a subsidiary to negotiate a major contract that is being incorporated in a tax haven? We need to also deal with the corruption of government officials who look the other way and collude and collaborate. Don't forget, as the Mbeki report has told us, almost 70% of IFF is from commercial transactions. There's the criminal part, there's the corruption part. But part of this, one of these happens because government officials enable, through the way they award contracts, by accepting odious obligations for government, which are incapable of performance, really. And when there's a little default, then it ends up in arbitration, and your guess is as good as mine. Nigeria has experienced all of this, and we're recently challenging quite a number of these odious clauses. We also have to take note of avoiding inimical double tax agreements and treaties through which multinational corporations and foreign investors are able to conduct aggressive tax planning that push ethical boundaries. We know that tax avoidance is legal, tax evasion is criminal and illegal. But aggressive tax planning borders on the ethical and the unethical, clearly designed to avoid paying revenue to the state. So we need to challenge such framework. And then, of course, African countries must seriously begin to consider adopting framework to tax digital transactions. We all know that this has come to stay, and it is big business for many, many multinational corporations. I would say a few words about what Nigeria is doing, and then I will close. Nigeria is, at the moment, pushing some of these proposals which I have mentioned, and she has taken quite a number of measures. First of all, implementing a voluntary tax compliance program to bring those who are not within the tax net and who have assets, foreign assets, to bring them within the tax net without penalty, given a time frame. The implementation of unexplained wealth orders or lifestyle audits are recognized both by the African Union Convention on Prevention and Combating of Corruption, I think is Article 16, that validates that we could do lifestyle audits so that those who are parading wealth that they cannot account for and who have also not been paying taxes should begin to be called to account. I'm happy to refer that just 3 days ago, the President of Nigeria signed a new Proceeds of Crime Act, which allows for lifestyle audit, and it also allows for civil forfeiture and the reversal of the burden of proof. If you are parading so much in terms of assets, we are not saying you are a thief or a criminal. We'll just ask you, how did you make the money? And the burden is on you to tell the state how you made the money. We also need to implement beneficial ownership standards. Again, Nigeria, through a new legal framework of the Corporate and Company and Allied Matters Act 2020, passed into law beneficial ownership standards. And the framework for that, because in today's world, you must have a robust digital framework to be able to track. But this is made so much easy if all countries are on the same page. Then, of course, implementing the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. I think one or two speakers have spoken clearly about dealing with transfer pricing and all of the challenges it gives for us when multinationals trade within their own group with all of the unethical practices that attend that. We also need to fight to get a voice at the table on global initiatives like the BEPS framework of the OECD that are currently ongoing. This is very important for inclusivity. I think that one of the things that everybody agrees is that we need inclusivity. But when it comes to implementing it, we seem to be divided. And of course, to also ride on existing international multilateral frameworks. For example, Nigeria signed on to the Mutual Convention on Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, which helps to strengthen the reporting standards by those who are doing business in our country and helps us to track what they are doing. Linked to this, of course, is the country-by-country reporting with the threshold of 750 million euros for multinational corporations, who, when they file returns, must file country by country and report what volume of business they are doing where. I will close my intervention by looking very quickly at asset recovery and asset return. Once we have country-specific data, it is easier to track all of this and to know who is bleeding the most and from where. And this is very important because the doctor cannot help you unless they do a diagnosis. And this is critical. We also need to accept that recovery effort is hindered by complex legal proceedings, the absence of civil recovery framework in some countries, multiple legal and jurisdictional challenges, including the quality and what type of evidence is admissible in which country and where. For example, Nigeria has been pursuing the Abacha loot for over 20 years, and yet we have not got half of it. And we keep being confronted with different parameters in different countries, even countries who were not the original owner. Abacha was not an American, Abacha was not a European, but different countries have filed lawsuits to recover Abacha loot and filed in different jurisdictions all over the world. And we have to deal with this. Then, of course, the legal framework in terms of common standards for asset recovery. It's like the chancellor's foot, as they say in England. There are different standards and parameters. You go to country A, you get given a shopping list of 20 issues. You go to country B, you get 15 and all that. There is no uniformity. And the international community needs to sit down if we're going to make this happen at all, because it is one thing to track IFF, it's another thing to stop it. But the one that has gone out, how do we get it back? We need a framework, and that framework must be applicable to everybody. I will urge African countries to have their own national legal framework that enables them to recover assets. I want to thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the time to speak.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Dr. Hanan Mursi has to leave now because she has a meeting in town. We will continue. I know we started a bit late. But we'll also have another 15 minutes. So thank you. Yeah. Now, I would like to give the floor, with your permission, to Ms. Gillian Dell from Transparency International. Gillian, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings from Berlin. Distinguished Chair and fellow panelists and delegates, on behalf of Transparency International, I'd like to express our thanks to the UN Economic Commission for Africa for the invitation to speak on this panel. We're honored to be represented here. And I have been working away at cutting back my notes here, so I'll try and keep it brief. We know that the dual problems of illicit financial flows and asset recovery in Africa have been discussed for many years now, and it's essential that progress be accelerated. So it would be very welcome if this meeting of ministers could agree on a joint action plan for coordinated action, building on the common African position on asset recovery and other instruments. A major common challenge to address all illicit financial flows concerns secrecy, including the role of secrecy mechanisms, secrecy jurisdictions, and secrecy enablers. And for this reason, we have proposed a common core agenda for tackling secrecy. A range of transparency measures should be considered, many of them covered in the Common African Position. First among them are measures relating to beneficial ownership of companies. And as we know, anonymous companies are the most widely used vehicle for laundering money and hiding assets. Thanks to their disguised ownership, they operate without scrutiny. As a key measure for tackling illicit financial flows, beneficial ownership transparency has been firmly at the top of Africa's development finance agenda for several years. And in February 2021, the UN FACTI panel, in its final report, recommended that international anti-money laundering standards should require that all countries create a centralized beneficial ownership register for all legal vehicles and encourage countries to make the information public. And the Common African Position also refers to this issue, and most recently it was the subject of a resolution at the last session of the UNCAC Conference of States Parties in December 2021. So to deliver on the SDGs, we believe it's key for African countries to move ahead with key reforms in this area. In this regard, we believe it's important to introduce central registers that are accessible to the public, have adequate verification mechanisms, that there should be dissuasive sanctions for failure to comply, and that beneficial ownership information should be required for all companies bidding on public contracts. Other transparency, regulatory, and enforcement measures in the public and private sectors should also help stem illicit financial flows. I will briefly mention a few examples. First of all, special mention should be made of the role of the enablers who are complicit in devising complex transactions to conceal illicit flows. That includes financial institutions, lawyers, accountants, company service providers, real estate agents, and others. And they typically deliver their illicit services with impunity. So it's crucial to regulate, supervise, and enforce against them in line with the Common African Position language, calling for them to be held, calling for holding accountable facilitators and intermediaries of illicit financial flows. And we also agree with the comments that have been made about the need for companies to do country by country reporting, or in the case of the extractive industries, on a project by project basis as required under the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. With regard to the public sector, and since we as TI are interested in corruption, we believe transparency measures to prevent corruption are crucial in public contracting and licensing processes. And we believe countries should aim to adopt the open contracting principles adopted by the Open Contracting Partnership. In addition, asset declarations for public officials can also play an important role in preventing illicit financial flows. And we agree with the CAPAR language that encourages transparency and accessibility of information regarding remuneration and assets of public officials. We also welcome the CAPAR language identifying protection of whistleblowers and enabling the roles of media and civil society as areas that are critical to the detection of illicit activities, but are not adequately addressed by current institutional, legislative, and policy frameworks. And as has been mentioned by other speakers, better data collection is crucial for effective work to stem illicit financial flows. As a last area, I'd like to mention asset recovery, and clearly there's a long way to go. In that regard, we have proposed a multilateral agreement on asset recovery to help advance results in this area, whether taking the form of a standalone General Assembly approved instrument or a declaration, or if limited to proceeds of corruption, a protocol to the UNCAC. In a proposal we submitted to the UNGAS Against Corruption last year, jointly with the UNCAC Coalition, we proposed that such an agreement cover three main areas relating to transparent, accountable, effective, and just asset recovery. I won't go into them here due to the time constraints. We also included mention of a possible role for regional or international institutions in coordination of investigations, oversight of asset recovery processes, and dispute mediation. This is something similar to what the FACTI panel also proposed and should be explored. And while this proposal was not taken up by the UNGAS, we still believe that some kind of multilateral agreement could help advance asset recovery efforts. By way of conclusion, I want to commend the ECA for holding this discussion and helping to keep up the momentum in the area of illicit financial flows and asset recovery in Africa. We hope that this meeting will agree on an action plan for the coming year and beyond. We should not rest until there are significant advances. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Yes, for pointing out evolving transparency measures in the fight against illicit financial flows. Thanks. Now let me come back to the floor here, and I would like to give the floor first to Mr. Malik Diop for 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Malik. Yes, 2 minutes, please.
Voilà, merci beaucoup de m'avoir donné la parole et de nous donner l'opportunité de partager l'expérience du Sénégal dans le cadre du projet pilote sur les flux financiers illicites. En effet, après avoir développé une méthodologie, où la CONUCED a proposé à certains pays de tester cette méthodologie qui nous permet d'avoir une idée sur les flux financiers illicites. Donc, dans le cadre du projet pilote intitulé « Définir, estimer et diffuser des statistiques sur les flux financiers illicites », dont l'objectif était, dans un premier temps, l'appropriation des méthodes par les États membres, mais également le renforcement des capacités des pays. L'ANSD s'est proposé de faire partie de ce travail-là qui a permis un peu d'avoir une idée sur les statistiques sur les flux financiers illicites. Alors, à cet effet, il est important de partager et de communiquer sur l'expérience du pays, la démarche adoptée et également les résultats, notamment en termes d'expérience et d'apport par rapport à l'appareil statistique sénégalais. Alors, pour ce qui est de la démarche, un peu l'ANSD a essayé d'impliquer l'ensemble des acteurs concernés par les flux financiers, notamment les structures étatiques, mais également les forums civils, à la suite d'un premier travail réalisé avec l'appui d'un consultant national qui nous permettait d'avoir l'auto-évaluation des flux financiers et les risques auxquels le Sénégal fait face. Cela a permis un peu d'identifier l'ensemble des structures concernées par la question et également de voir quels sont les flux financiers les plus pertinents à mesurer pour le Sénégal. Alors, c'est l'occasion pour nous de remercier la CONUCED pour l'accompagnement financier et technique. À la suite de cette première phase, nous avons entamé l'estimation des flux financiers illicites, dont les principaux qui nous concernent étaient la fausse facturation et l'évasion fiscale agressive. Alors, ce travail a été implémenté et nous a permis d'avoir des résultats, mais également en termes d'expérience, nous a permis de mettre en œuvre et de s'approprier des méthodologies qui ont été développées et d'identifier quelques limites auxquelles nous avons fait face durant le travail, à savoir la disponibilité d'informations statistiques plus détaillées et également, dans un second temps, les méthodologies telles que ça a été adopté ou bien celles que ça a été proposé ne s'appliquent pas forcément par rapport aux données existantes dans ce pays. Alors, c'est ça qui a permis un peu de conduire ou bien de proposer un plan d'action qui va nous aider à pérenniser cela. Je vous remercie.
Yes, please. Okay, thank you, Mr. Diop. Now I would like to open the floor for questions, comments by participants. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I am Dr. Ibinejo. I'm from Nigeria. I am from ICPC Nigeria. My brief comment is in relation to political will. Because in asset recovery, these countries in Africa, even as we expect the countries from outside of Africa to help us, we have to help ourselves. Charity must begin at home. And we find that in the literature, we read that there is much corruption in Africa. And the assets we recover are few. And it so happens that because of the lack of the political will by the political leadership of these countries, we don't pursue our assets. We don't pursue them locally or externally. And it will appear as if even when we use the UNCAC, we wait for the US, the UK, and others to start recovering our assets before we now appear from nowhere to say that, okay, return our assets to us. So within our countries, we must have that political will to recover, to look for and recover our assets. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, political will is critical. Comments, questions? I think we still have some time before lunch. Okay. Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. My name is Kisu Simwaka from Malawi. I work with the central bank. The issue of illicit flows for Malawi is a serious one because we have significant external financing needs. Our export proceeds can only finance 1/3 of our import bill. We estimate that illicit financial flows are around 400 to 500 million US dollars, implying that if they were effectively tracked and picked up, it means that our export proceeds should have been able to fund about half of our import bill. Currently, as a country, there are collaborative efforts with different agencies of government to try and track these illicit flows, which involves the central bank, the revenue authority, the financial intelligence unit, the police, and other key agencies. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think country measurement of IFFs is important. And what you have done in Malawi is the start. In order to be able to track illicit financial flows, we have to be able to measure them. We have questions from participants who joined us virtually. Maybe if possible, Jamal, we can just read these questions, and then I will give the floor to speakers to respond to some of them, if possible. Yeah. Do you have the questions? Yeah. You can give them the phone, the microphone, please.
Yes, we have Marcia Montelli. They've just upgraded her to a speaker. Marcia, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Martha Muntali. I'm coming from the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption. And by Monday, we're going to be African Union Advisory Body Against Corruption. We just wanted to comment. I think Madam Gillian was referring to the CAPA a lot. I think for me, there's need for the institutions, specifically for both the African Union and UNECA, to be able to capacitate the countries. I think that is what is needed for now. because yes, the CAPA was adopted, but and a lot of strategies that are to be adopted by the member states, by the countries, to be able to recover these assets. But as even Dr. Braj was saying, there's a lot of work to be done, even for the countries to enhance their legal capacity, to be able to understand the legal requirements from the countries where the assets are. So there's a great need for the multilateral institutions, specifically the African Union and UNECA, and even through the UNCAC mechanisms, to be able to enhance the capacity of the states as far as the asset recovery is concerned. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. If there is no further comment here, I would like to give the floor to speakers, Gillian and others, for final words. 1 minute each, please. Okay.
Mr. Moderator, in which order do you wish us to speak, sir?
Yes. Yes, Polaji.
This is Professor Watson. I wanted to know if you have a particular order in which you want us to speak. Okay, since I have the floor, I'll just be very brief. I thank all those who have made comments. I want to particularly agree with the last speaker from Lesotho that there is a need to popularize and to engage a bit more, both at the level of the AU-ABC and the AU generally on the CAPA. What I can tell the meeting is that the Coalition for the Dialogue on Africa, CODA, which is like the secretariat for the Mbeki panel, is making effort to have a lot of capacity building activities on the CAPA, its scope, and what are the things that need to be done, including some kind of scoping to know what is the state of play in each country, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and what do we need to be upscaling. So I agree, this would also help to enhance the political will that the participant from Nigeria mentioned earlier on. I want to thank ECA and the other panelists for being a part of this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Polaji. Final words, Gillian?
Well, I'll be very brief, and I appreciated those comments. I thought they were very interesting, and political will is an issue everywhere in the world at times, and equally in some countries in Africa, I know. So, actually that's partly up to the people to help reinforce that, and therefore there's a need for civil society space and for space for the media. I'd also like to say I appreciated the comment about the need for technical assistance and support to countries to strengthen their institutions. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
And that this has to be part of any global effort in tackling illicit financial flows. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to give a hand of applause to our speakers. And to you too for making this a lively event. As you know, the topic of illicit financial flows is not an easy one. And we know how difficult it has been for us in ECA, AU, and the UN in general, and partners all over the world, even to talk about it and to have people understand what is meant by illicit financial flows, and then to act on fighting illicit financial flows. But I would like to say that progress has been made, and I am happy that we are moving forward. And we will continue the difficult task of fighting illicit financial flows, because it is equally important for the difficult task other tasks which we have to undertake, namely providing the resources, mobilizing the resources we need to finance Africa's development. Thank you and enjoy your lunch.